that letter from Lawrence Abrahamson, the then senior partner of Harbottle Lewis, mentioned that emails had been reviewed of Andy Coulson, Stuart Kuttner, Ian Edmondson, Clive Goodman, Neil Wallace and Jules Stenson, and that nothing had come to light from that review that contradicted the lone road reporter working with Glenn Mulcair. Knowing what you know now from the other evidence you've discovered, have you looked back in detail at the basis on which Harbottle and Lewis wrote that letter, and why they gave such a clean bill of health?
All I can say is that having having looked at some of the things in that, and the advice of the senior people inside the company more recently that went and looked at that, it was the view of the company, self-evidently, that that it was right to bring this to the attention of the police and go forward. And that opinion from the council was something that the company, rested on. It was a clear opinion about a review that was done around those records, and in addition, in conjunction with the police continuing to say that there was no new evidence and that there was no reason to open a new investigation, and in conjunction with the PCC saying that they had done their review and done their inquiry and there was nothing new there, it was viewed that that was a settled matter. And it was only really when new evidence emerged that those three things began to be undermined.
In a follow-up to the session, could you just provide us with the instructions that were given to Harbottle and Lewis, the information, the extent of the information that was given to them out of the totality of information that was available? That sort of detail would help us conclude what really.
I think if there's additional detail required around some of those legal instructions, we will consult and come back to the chairman with a way to satisfy you with the information that you'd like to have.
I mean, clearly, we spotted last in our report that this review coincided not so much with Mr. Myler's arrival, but with the timing of the Industrial Tribunal actions that Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair were planning. And that begged the question of why these 6 individuals were named in there. Do you know the reason why it was limited to these 6 individuals?
Why it was limited to those 6 individuals, I don't know. I think it was I wasn't there at the time, and I can't tell you the circumstances, the conversations that people had with Harbottle and Lewis, or the terms of reference of that. But it was viewed that was something that would be, and had been viewed after the fact, that was, had been a thorough look at information, and based on that review, that opinion was issued.
Neville Thurbeck is one omission that sort of immediately jumps out.
Again, in hindsight, you can say, and we can all say, if somebody had looked at this, or somebody had known something that wasn't known yet at the time, but I can't comment on why the terms and why the scope was what it was.
The proceedings by Goodman and Mulcair for unfair dismissal, notwithstanding their criminal convictions, clearly never saw the light of day because they were settled beforehand. So therefore, we don't know what they were planning to serve on you. Do you know what sorts of allegations that they were making? We can only imagine that they were saying that such and such a person knew, such and such a person knew. Have you satisfied yourself about what allegations they were making?
Mr. Farrell, I think many of these individuals you mentioned are currently subject to criminal investigation. Some have been arrested recently, and these are important matters for the police now. And I do think it's important that I don't stray into, or I'm not led into, commenting specifically about individuals or allegations made in the past.
Whether you satisfied yourself as to what Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair were alleging in discussions and negotiations that led up to the settlements, if they brought industrial tribunal proceedings against you. That was the question.
As to Glenn
Mulcair. Not about what they were alleging, but have you satisfied yourself about what they were alleging?
As to Glenn Mulcair, I'm not aware of allegations at the time and other things. And as to Goodman, again, this was in 2007, before I was there, it's my understanding that that is what Harbottle and Lewis were helping to deal with, and that opinion did satisfy the company at the time, and the company rested on that opinion for a period of time.
I take it you'd like to take the opportunity to withdraw this letter as an accurate portrayal of what really went on at the News of the World.
Is that the letter?
This is the Harbour and Lewis letter.
It's something that I think it's something that actually, I'm glad you've asked about it actually, because it is a key bit of outside legal advice from senior counsel that was provided to the company that the company rested on. And I think it goes some distance in explaining actually why it has taken a long time for new information to come to light. And actually, and I would say, Mr. Farrelly, I think it's important, it was one of the bases for which, if you will, the sort of pushback that the company made against new allegations. It was one of the sort of pillars of the environment around the place that led the company to believe that all of these things were a matter of the past and that new allegations could be denied.
The question again was different, Mr. Murdoch. I asked you whether this letter, which is still lying on the record as evidence given to this committee, and has not, for whatever reason, no doubt you'll say to do with the criminal investigation, being withdrawn, would you like to withdraw it?
Mr. Farrelly, respectfully, I am not aware of the legal technicalities of withdrawing that or submitting it on the record. I think it is a relevant document in trying to understand how News International was thinking at the time.
We'll ask you the question when we.
So I would say no, but I can come back after taking counsel and seeing if that's if it's a better idea to do it.
I want to wind up given the time, but I've got a few more questions. When, as you've described it, and as Colin Myler described it to us, the email investigation was carried out by the IT department, and it was overseen by the Director of Legal Affairs, John Chapman, and the Human Resources Director, Daniel Cloak. Is that your understanding?
Pardon me, what was the question? I don't understand. Is it my understanding that...
The investigation itself, you have described it, Colin Myler described it to us. It was carried out by the IT department and overseen by the Director of Legal Affairs, John Chapman, and the Human Resources Director, Personnel Director, Daniel Cloak. Is that an accurate description?
That is my understanding.
Okay. Can you tell us why John Chapman has left the organisation?
John Chapman and the organisation decided it was, in mutual interest to part ways, and I think I think one of the pieces here as well is for the company to move forward is for, and I think this is important. Many of the individuals, even if there's no evidence of wrongdoing or anything like that, and I think that and no evidence of impropriety, many individuals have chosen that it's time to part ways.
So
I was not involved with the discussions with Mr. Chapman.
You have no evidence
of
any complicity by Mr. Chapman to cover up the existence of the file that's belatedly been discovered?
I do not have that.
Okay. And can you tell us the employment status of Daniel Cloak?
Mr. Cloak left the company some time ago, and I don't know what his employment status is. He's not in the business. He was the Director of Human Resources for a number of years, not that many actually, I'm not sure, but left over a year ago, I think, but I can follow up with you the status.
Okay. And just turning very quickly to the witnesses who came to us. And again, in respect of the file that you've discovered this year, regarding Les Hinton, when did he first become aware of this collection of emails and paper, as you discovered to call it, that clearly rendered the advice given, the evidence given to us misleading by him? When did he learn about it?
I can't speak to Mr. Hinton's knowledge. That are you referring to? In 2011 or in 2007?
No, this document that was left in
2007. You would. I can't speak to his knowledge, but I know that Mr. Hinton was aware of the work that had been carried out, and I think he's testified to this committee to that effect.
Have you asked him whether, Mr. Murdoch Senior, have you asked Les Hinton whether he knew about this document?
No.
Why not?
About
which
document?
Which document?
We're talking about the document that you discovered in April, May, in the offices of Harbour and Lewis. That.
I don't think it's I have not asked him, but I also think that he and I think he's testified this, that he, as the chief executive of News International at the time, would not have been expected necessarily to read X hundreds or thousands of emails there, but would rely on the opinion of counsel about what they had done.
And was Colin Myler aware of this evidence lying with the Harbottle and Lewis?
I cannot speak to other individuals' knowledge in the past. I simply don't.
And Tom Crone?
I simply, Mr. Farrelly, I can't speak for them.
And Stuart, that's a German pronunciation, sorry, Stuart Kuttner?
The same goes, Mr. Farrelly, and I simply can't speak for them.
And Rebecca Brooks?
I simply cannot speak for their knowledge. I know that Mrs. Brooks, when she was chief executive of this, was one of the people who brought it to my attention as a new thing.
Just to finish off this questioning, I'm just going to wrap up, but we're left now in a situation where you, having looked into this affair, having cooperated with the police, cannot tell us who lodged the file with Harbottle and Lewis, who was aware of its contents, and who kept you from being in the full possession of the facts. Evidence that is clearly now being submitted to the police, but clearly contradicts all the assurances that we were given, not in one but in two select committee inquiries. And that's frankly, I hope you'd agree, unsatisfactory.
Mr. Farrelly, I can say that the company at the time engaged an outside law firm to review a number of these emails. They were provided to the law firm, as I understand it. They were reviewed, an opinion based on that review was issued to the company of a respected outside law firm, and the opinion was clear. And the company rested on that. I cannot speak to individuals' knowledge at different times, and because I simply don't know. What I do know is that the company rested on that, rested on the fact that the police told us that there was no new evidence, there was no reason for a new investigation, and rested on the opinion of the PCC that there was no new information and no reason to carry it further. And it wasn't until new evidence emerged from the civil trials, the civil litigations that were going on, that the company immediately went to the police, restarted and the company has done the right thing in that respect.
This is evidence that was lying in your company's and your lawyer's possession all the time. It's not simply evidence that emerged through litigation. Can I, Mr. Murdoch Senior, the
Harbottle was re-looked at. Sorry, Mr. Farrelly. May I?
Yes, Karen.
Was looked at in conjunction with the new and restarted criminal investigation. And these are serious matters, and we take them seriously. When we looked at those, when it was looked at, and it was deemed that these things would be of interest to the police, we immediately actually brought in additional counsel, Lord MacDonald, who I believe you, Mr. Farrelly, mentioned earlier, and to help advise the company on what the appropriate way forward in terms of full transparency and cooperation with police investigations were. And they're very serious matters, and the company took them very seriously.
Mr. Murdoch Senior, just two questions.
Very quickly, Paul.
The situation that I've just painted, where we're now here, not knowing who at News International, News of the World, was complicit in keeping that file containing however many bits of paper. We're nowhere near knowing who knew what and when about that file. Evidence that clearly contradicts not only